and I first became a ham in 1981 with a call sign of N9EN. That was back when they had novices and CW requirements. And I was a novice for about 9 months and I upgraded to advanced. And about 6 months after that I upgraded to extra. Back when you had to know CW and you had to go to the FCC for tests. So I'm originally from Rockford, Illinois, 90 miles west of Chicago, and I had to go into Chicago for the FCC test. I don't have any PowerPoints or anything like that. All you guys is outlined to talk from. And I brought my current logbook. You can pass it around and look through it. I also brought a couple of pictures of my 20 and 40 meter HF antennas that I recently put up this summer. So that'll give you an idea of what I have to work with. You can't see the wire antennas in the picture. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. I got bit by the DX bug real quickly after first becoming a ham. Of course, being a novice, it was CW only. They didn't give you voice privileges. And my first real DX contact, which I would consider a real DX contact, was I didn't consider Canada or Mexico DX since they were bordering with the United States. But I worked Puerto Rico, and then what really put the icing on the cake for me was working Marshall Islands, KX6QO, and I was using an invert V antenna made out of RG58 coax, and the conditions were so bad I couldn't copy the guy's name. His name was Don, and I kept copying MONDON. But anyhow, we had a QSO, and I was bit by the DX bug. I'll go here and get started in this presentation. I'll just go over the outline here, and if anybody has any questions or if they'd like a copy of the outline later, just provide me with your name and email address and I can email it to you. And I'll also try to answer any questions that you might have at the end. So the first thing is the meaning of DX. I don't know where the term DX came from, but it stands for distance. And that's what I do, is DXing. I'm a DXer and a congestor. I don't do anything else. I don't know anything else. I'm real narrow-minded when it comes to ham radio. Requirements for DXing. Obviously, you have to have a QSO, and a QSO is an exchange of information. You must be able to hear the DX station, and he must be able to hear you, which is quite obvious, but a lot of people don't keep that in mind. And the two types of DXing that I'm familiar with are CW and single sideband. I operate about 99% CW. There's also other modes of DXing, RIDI, satellite, digital modes, and moon bounce. There's probably some others, but I'm not familiar with them. The next thing is the equipment needed. Either a transceiver or a separate transmitter and receiver, and a capability of split operation. And what split operation is a lot of times a DX station will be on one frequency. He'll be transmitting on one frequency, and he'll be listening off that frequency somewhere else, so that everybody isn't QRMing his signal. And most of the DX positions operate split, so you need that capability if you're serious about DXing. Other helpful things are optional CW and single sideband filters, and also external audio filters. And the next thing that's needed, of course, is an antenna. And there's various types of antennas, and all the antennas for DXing have one thing in common: they all have a very low angle of radiation. That's the secret to getting a good signal across the pond, rather than warming up the clouds with your RF. I'll just go over a few antenna types. The dipole, or a variation of a dipole, a vertical antenna, or a variation of that, an inverted V antenna, a delta-loop antenna, a Yankee antenna, usually called a beam, and a quad antenna. And they all have their advantages and disadvantages. The Yankee antenna and the quad antenna are generally the best ones because they will allow gain. They'll make your signal sound louder on the other end as compared to a wire antenna. Optional equipment that may or may not be needed, a linear amplifier, and I'll go into that more later. Access to the internet, a computer and an internet connection for accessing the DX cluster, and also you can use a computer for receiving DX bulletins via email. One of the best ones that I know is Kilo Bravo 8 November Whiskey's OPDX bulletin. He does a tremendous job of putting that bulletin on. He spends a lot of time on it, and it's very comprehensive, and he doesn't charge a thing for it. AWRL also has a DX bulletin that you can receive via email, and there's others that you can pay for, which I never have because I'm a cheapskate. And I think KB8NW is the best there is anyway. So, and also a computer is very handy for a logging program to keep track of all your contacts. There's various logging programs available. DX Base, DX for Win, Logger 32, and others that I'm not familiar with. And I use a logging program that's about 10 years out of date. It doesn't recognize the 10 newest countries, and it still recognizes 4 countries that have been deleted. And I just kind of get around that by keeping a separate logbook for the newest countries that it doesn't recognize. And I keep track of the deleted ones as far as my country totals go. And so far I've got about 53,400 QSOs in my logging program. And even though it's no program, it still works very well. I can bring up information on a specific QSO in less than a second. It'll go through all those QSOs that fast. Now the next thing that I want to cover is propagation. That's how to get your signal to the DX, how the DX gets this signal back to you. There are daytime and nighttime bands, generally. The daytime bands are 10, 12, 15, 17, and 20 meters. The nighttime bands are 40, 80, and 160. And 30 meters is kind of an in-between band. It's open during the daytime and also at night. It's kind of a cross between 40 and 20 meters. Yeah. And the next thing I'll go over is the band openings. The propagation generally follows the sun. I'll give you an example on 20 meters. Around 7:30 a.m. local time, you start here in Europe. And you'll hear Africa. And the propagation will follow the sun across the United States. And the openings to Africa stay open longer than the openings to Europe because they're trans-equatorial in nature. The signal goes across the equator. And also the openings to Central and South America stay open even longer than the African openings. The nighttime bands, they call them that because the bands generally rely on darkness between the 2 points. And one of the nice things about the nighttime bands is they have what they call gray line propagation, and that's a special condition when one end of the QSO is either coming into daylight or it's going into darkness, and that seems to enhance the signal many times, and it's very handy for working very weak signals. It's especially noticeable on the low bands, 40, 80, and 160. Okay, let's get down to working the DX now. Generally, the time and date are in UTC or GMT, whatever you want to call it. That's the time that it is in Greenwich, England. All hams around the world basically go by that time, so there's no confusion as to what day it is and what time it is. And I've already covered split operation. And the next thing that I will cover is what they call the DX nets. I don't know how many of them there still are, but they used to be kind of popular 20, 30 years ago. And you basically have an MC station, somebody that was controlling the net, and he would get these DX agents to check into the net. And the people that wanted to work the DX, they would call the MC and they would get on a list to work the DX. and the MC would call the stations wanting to work the DX in the order that he got them on the list, and that's how they would work the DX. Well, after I'd been a ham and a DXer for a while, I kind of gave up on the net operation. I figured that was kind of like being spoon-fed your DX. So, anyhow, like I said, I don't know if they still have nets or not, but I just thought I would mention it. The next thing in working the DX is tuning the bands. A lot of DXers rely on the DX cluster. They depend on other people to find their DX for them rather than tuning the bands and finding it for themselves. And there's two bad things about that. One of the things is somebody that is spotting a DX station, they might have spotted the guy's call wrong. And you might possibly put the wrong call sign in your log. So it's always best to listen for yourself as to what's on there. And confirm the guy's call just to make sure that it's right. And also, another benefit to tuning around is a lot of the DX stations, they don't like crowds. They like to have QSOs, lengthy QSOs with other stations once in a while, so they're generally off the beaten path. Like on 20 meters, a lot of DX stations, they'll hang out around 14,030, 035 because they don't want to be down in the bottom end of the band where all the DX usually hangs out. So a lot of times you can find some really good DX higher up in the band. So I really encourage you to tune around and not just depend on the cluster. The next things that I want to go over are behavior and pileups. A pileup is when there's a rare or semi-rare DX station that everybody wants to talk to. In a pileup generation, everybody wants to contact at once. And they can get very unruly. And I've got a few tips for pileup behavior, just from the experience that I've received over the years. And I'll just go over these real briefly. It's best to pay attention to what's going on. If the DX station is asking for a specific call, like if he's asking for a K4 Tango, and you're a Kilo Bravo 4, don't be calling because he's not listening for your call. He's listening for the K4, and it just slows things down. And other times the DX station will ask for a specific call area, or a specific country, or a specific geographical area of the world. And it's best to respect that because you don't want to get on the bad side of a DX operator. And also it's just bad manners. And sometimes the DX station is being deliberately QRM'd. And just a few months ago I ran into the term DQRM and I didn't know what it meant. And I looked it up and I found out what it meant. And when I first started DXing, at least on the CW bands, there was no intentional QRM. It just wasn't done. And I think the first Beauvais operation, to me, that's when all the QRM really got to start. And it's just gotten worse since. But if you hear a DX station being QRM, it's best not to act like a policeman telling him to get off the frequency or telling him that he's listening up, because it just makes things worse. And also, if you're tuning up an amplifier, don't tune it up on the DX station's frequency. There's so much of that goes on, you wouldn't believe it. It's just very, very bad manners, very poor operating. Another thing that I want to cover is a lot of sideband operators, they'll get into the habit of giving out their last two letters of their call, thinking that they'll get through the pileup better. I recommend against that. First of all, because it's illegal. The FCC wants you to use your full call sign, and also it slows things down because the DX station is listening for full calls. And if he hears a partial call, he will come back and ask about that partial call. So that's another reason to give your full call sign. Now the next thing that I want to cover is linear amplifiers. There's a lot of people that think that linears is something that you just have to have, but something that's at least as important as an amplifier, if not more important, is a good antenna with gain. I'm just going to give some of these numbers here, and I don't know about the exact accuracy, but it'll give you an idea of what I'm trying to get at. A signal is generally referred to as so many dBs in loudness, like on your S meter, and like you'll have a signal report of S9 or 10 dBs over S, and a lot of people don't know what a decibel is. A decibel is an increase or a decrease in the amount of sound required by human perception, the very least little bit. That's 1 decibel. That's not very much. And an increase in 3 decibels, which is a noticeable change, approximates about a half of an S unit on an S meter. An increase of 10 decibels will give you a signal that's perceived to be twice as loud. A lot of antennas will give you 6 to 8 dBs of gain, and that's at least as important as an amplifier, if not more so. And VHF antennas are capable of even more gain than that due to increased number of elements and a longer boom. Next thing I want to go over is considerations in linear amplifiers. There's a lot of 600 watt amplifiers that are being sold, but in my opinion they're a waste of money, because the station on the other end, if you switch from 100 watts to 600 watts, the guy on the other end is not going to hear hardly any difference whatsoever. It's really surprising. And in order for you to have a really noticeable change in your signal strength, you have to increase your signal strength 10 times. In other words, go from 100 watts to 1,000. And I'll give you a little analogy. This isn't radio related, but it's audio related as far as a stereo system. I'm a rock and roll nut, and I've got some pretty big speakers and some decent amplifiers. And one day I got the bright idea I was going to assemble a system, and I was going to recreate a concert hall sound. So I dragged a bunch of speakers all together, and I split my preamp so I could feed 2 power amps. And my 2 power amps, they would each give me 150 watts per channel. And I hooked those speakers up in series parallel to give a good load to the amplifiers, and I was all ready for a deafening sound. And I went and turned the thing on, and it wasn't hardly any louder than what I was using before. And the reason for that is the 10 times rule. You have to have an increase of 10 times in power in order to notice a real big change. And I had forgotten that, so I was just wasting my time, which I found out the hard way. Well, enough of that. The next thing I want to cover is obtaining QSL cards. Usually hams like to exchange cards for verification purposes. There's various ways to go about getting the cards, and I'll briefly mention the different methods. The first one is QSLing via the Bureau. The ARRL runs an outgoing QSL service, and you have to be a member of the league to send your cards to the Bureau. But you don't have to be a member of the league to receive your cards. And to receive your cards, you have to have envelopes on file, stamped envelopes on file with the person that's volunteering to handle the incoming cards. I was a volunteer for 17 years in the 9th District Bureau. The advantages of going through the Bureau, turn the page here. It's the lowest cost way of getting a QSL card, a paper card that is. And many foreign stations, they can only afford the QSL via the Bureau. They can't afford money for direct postage. And also, you can, there's another good way of receiving QSLs. You can use what they call Club Log to request QSLs. It's an online QSL request service, and you request cards online, but they come back to you through the Bureau. So it's kind of halfway direct and halfway through the Bureau. But they do a very good job of handling the cards. And the disadvantage to Bureau QSL is it takes a very long time to get your cards usually, sometimes 3 or 4 years. And another disadvantage is the ARRL keeps increasing their fees. And it used to be a real bargain when I first started out, but it's not anymore.
Yeah, it's $1 per pound now. So.
Yeah, it's expensive. The next method of QSLing is to mail your cards directly to the foreign DX station or the foreign QSL bureau. It's a lot faster, but it's a lot more expensive. The advantages are it's the fastest way to receive your cards, and also you don't need a membership in the ARRL. And the disadvantage is it's the most costly way of getting a QSL. It requires trips to the post office, and usually you have to provide some method of payment. If it's a DX station operating himself, I'll give you an example. He doesn't want 1,000 cards from Tennessee. He might want just 1 or 2. So if you're working him and you want his card, he's doing you a favor by sending you his card. And the best way to ensure a QSL attorney is to provide some type of payment to him to help him with his postage expenses. There's a few ways to do that. You can send them with green stamps, which are dollar bills. I don't know if the post office still sells IRCs or not. They used to sell these coupons that you would purchase like stamps, and the coupons would be redeemable in foreign countries for foreign airmail postage. I don't know if they're still available or not. Some stations also use PayPal, and you might check into that. Usually on the QRZ.com webpage that they have, they'll specify what they need and what helps them out the most. The next way of obtaining QSLs, which I already mentioned, is Club Log. That's a very good way to obtain cards. And as I mentioned previously, you don't need to be a member of the league. And another advantage is that when you're requesting the card, you can provide some financial support to the DXpedition or to the DX station online. And it helps them out some. So that's something else to keep in mind. And other ways of QSLing which I know nothing about are EQSLing and Log of the World. I don't get on Log of the World, and I don't participate in the EQSLs. The next thing I want to go into is the awards associated with DXing. The ARRL has a few awards. They have a Work to All States award. I got my novice Work to All States award when I was a novice. Of course, that was CW only. And then the ARRL, they also have a general Work to All States award, which you get for working all 50 states. And they also have the 5-band Work to All States award. And they also have a Work to All Continents award, where you can get an award for working all 7 continents. The DXCC awards, that's the ARRL's award for working 100 countries minimum. You provide proof of confirmation that you've worked with 100 countries, and they'll give you a DXCC award. That award's generally not too difficult to get. You can work very many countries in a popular contest. Another award that they have is the 5-band DXCC. That's a lot more difficult due to the fact that propagation on 40 and 80 meters is much harder than propagation on 20 in the higher bands. So that's another award that they have. And the CQ magazine, they also have an awards program. They have their Work to All Zones awards. They've divided the world up into 40 basically arbitrary zones. And the idea of that award is that you need confirmation from each zone in order to get your Work to All Zones award. And they also have a 5-band Work to All Zones award. And that award is much more difficult than 5-band DXCC. And the reason for that is in a lot of zones there are very few hams, or no hams at all. And the ones that are there, a lot of them are not active. So It's quite a challenge to get some zones for the Worked All Zones Award. I was able to earn my 5-band Worked All Zones Award, and the last zone I needed was one of the UA9s, and I had every other zone confirmed, and I ran across this guy calling CQ on sideband on 20 meters one day, and nobody was coming back to him, so I thought, well, I'll give him a signal report, and I did. And he told me where he was at, and I looked in the call book, and I found out that that was the same area of the zone that I needed. And I asked the guy, I said, do you know so-and-so? He said, sure I do. And I said, well, could you help me get his cell card? That's the last zone that I need for my 5-band Worked All zone. And he says, I'll be happy to. He said, I'll take your card over to him. And then he asked me if I would do him a favor, and I said, sure, if I can. And he asked me, could you mail back issues of the, it's not the DX bulletin, it's the ARRL's contesting journal,
Oh, NC.
National Contest Journal. He asked me if I would mail him back issues of those, and I said, sure, I'll be glad to. So I mailed him a year's worth of back issues to the National Contest Journal, just to help him out, because you know they have so very little over there. And he was very appreciative of that. That's how I got my last zone for my 5-band Worked All zones. Another facet in the awards is many foreign countries, they sponsor their own awards. And myself, I'm of Swedish descent. I concentrate on Swedish awards. A few years ago, the Swedish National Ham Radio Club, they were celebrating their 75th anniversary, and if you contacted 75 Swedish hams, they sent you this nice certificate, and I wound up getting certificate number 37, and I was very proud of that. And right now I'm trying to work all Swedish communes. Communes are kind of like counties, only they're a little bit bigger. They also have parishes that equate more to our counties, but anyhow, there's 290 Swedish communes, and I've got like 157 of them worked. And it's quite a challenge to find stations that you need, that are in the area that you need. So that's what I've been doing to keep up my interest in ham radio. So, and I brought those maps for you to look at. I like to keep busy with the ham radio even when I'm not on the air, when there's no propagation. And I put those maps together, and the little dots that are on the maps, they're some of the cities where I've had QSOs with, and some of the cities are so small that they don't appear on the map. So I've tried my best to put them on there as accurately as possible. So I just try to keep busy with ham radio, and it keeps my interest up in it. If anybody needs a copy of this outline, or if they need any information, just provide me with your name and email address, or you can call me anytime, and I'll be more than happy to help in any way that I can.